Item: SCP-1383. Code name: Partially Functioning Pataphorical Torment Chamber. Object Class: Euclid. Special Containment Procedures: SCP-1383 is closed to customers and hotel staff. Keys to the room are stored at Research Facility 5. SCP-1383 affected Foundation personnel are to explain the nature and symptoms of their contamination to all personnel of sufficient object clearance who interact with them and are to avoid socializing with persons of insufficient object clearance. Counseling is available in the psychiatric wing of Research Facility 5 for any personnel who experience distress as a result of being exposed to SCP-1383 or affected persons. Following Incident 2-1977, personal GPS devices are to be worn by affected individuals at all times, and 2 personnel are to monitor this data. One which is informed of SCP-1383's effect who will record any changes in GPS data, and one which is not informed of SCP-1383's effect who will record GPS data from memory. Any changes in data recorded by the latter group are to be reported to the head researcher to prevent additional containment breaches of SCP-1383 entities. Description: SCP-1383 is room number 14 at a Motel 6 located in Gilroy, California. Living humans and other sapient beings, see addendum, which enter the hotel room are physically and mentally unchanged, but become subjected to an effect which causes anyone who thinks about an affected person to believe that that person is still physically inside SCP-1383. See Post-Recovery Interview 1383-3. SCP-1383 affected humans are able to move freely and can keep track of their own location as normal. One exception was discovered in Experiment 1383-7, a test subject whose vision and sense of location were disabled as part of experimentation placed himself within the anomaly. Feelings of dissociation are often reported following contamination with the effect, although no physiological effects have been diagnosed. Those coming into frequent contact with SCP-1383 affected persons complain of a distressing sense of cognitive dissonance. In Experiment 1383-1319, a D-Class subject was instructed to enter SCP-1383 and describe its contents. He provided an accurate inventory of the room and confirmed that he was its only occupant. After 24 hours, the D-Class was asked to write down a list of everything in the room to the best of his memory. The list he completed Experiment Log 1383-9A. Not provided here included the main furniture and other features of SCP-1383, a green-hued sphere of rock floating near the ceiling fan, and several hundred people. He was unable to describe the behavior of these inhabitants, referring to them as just in there. SCP-1383 was discovered during the Foundation investigation of a local news story describing an employee blunder which resulted in a room being simultaneously booked to over 700 customers. The Foundation is currently in the process of using the room's guest records to locate and handle civilians believed to be SCP-1383 contaminated. During initial containment, a security agent discovered a wrinkled and folded sheet of light brown paper in a bedside drawer. This sheet is covered on both sides in 6-point typewritten script which describes a process intended to assemble an idea trap using a room or other enclosure and a hypothetical component, listing as an example the theorized planetary body Themis. The ritual directions are written in an informal second-person style, apparently by someone in a state of severe mental distress. Handwritten marginal notes describe an intent to undermine or destroy. Priests, which were residing in the motel during initial containment, were evacuated immediately by containment personnel under false pretense. Researchers are investigating. Ion, are you receiving? By 2005. Post-recovery interview 1383-3 excerpts. The 12th of November 1976. Forward. The interviewed subject is researcher Cartwright, direct supervisor of Dr. Frey, a specialist in mind-affecting anomalies employed at Site 47 in Nevada. Dr. Frey was brought in to evaluate the properties of SCP-1383, during which point he was subjected to the properties of SCP-1383. Frey returned to his regular assignment on the 12th of August 1976. Interviewer: when was the last time you saw Dr. Frey? Dr. Cartwright: this morning, in B Hall. Interviewer: and what did you say to him? Dr. Cartwright: I bit his head off a little because he was so late back from his assignment at that Motel 6. He kept saying he was coming back, but he was 3 days late. Interviewer: how did Dr. Frey react? Dr. Cartwright: he told me that we had met in the break room yesterday, and I had said the same thing. Interviewer: does that make sense to you? Dr. Cartwright: not really. I couldn't have talked to him if he was at the Santa Clara site the whole time, right? It was a pretty weak attempt to cover his ass. Interviewer: to the best of your knowledge, where is Frey now? Dr. Cartwright: this is a trick question, isn't it? He's right. He's back in California on that research trip. At this rate, we should probably just transfer him there for good. End log. Note: on the 29th of December 1976, Dr. Frey requested to be transferred to Research Facility 5 to continue study of SCP-1383. He cited professional and personal issues resulting from his SCP-1383 affected status which prevented him from continuing in his current position. Almost all SCP-1383 contaminated personnel have requested similar reassignments, and in the interest of reducing confusion in the workplace, Research Facility 5 has expanded to fit these transfers. Incident 1383-A. On the 2nd of November 1977, at UST 4:30, a co-worker of SCP-1383 affected Agent S. Weber expressed concern regarding his behavior. When questioned, she explained that something had reminded her of the agent, at which point she remembered that he was in SCP-1383. Making a deal to bring down the moon so he can climb out. Weber denied this claim. This marks the first time the location and behavior of an SCP-1383 entities are described with more precision than their location in SCP-1383. Following this incident, a series of extranormal events occurred in the 5-mile radius around SCP-1383. Primarily, numerous assault and murder incidents were called into local police which regarded people who are alive and unharmed. These events correlated with psychological issues in those who are close to or regularly interact with affected individuals, due to an intermittent belief that those people are injured or dead, one in each case. When a description of the perpetrator was obtained, it matched that of Agent Weber. However, records of Agent Weber's activity indicate no possibility that he is responsible for these events. In addition, when the researcher who reported the incident was asked to recall Agent Weber's current whereabouts, she reported that he was in Research Facility 5, within the observation chamber of SCP, a safe-level mimetic hazard to which Weber had been given object clearance during a recovery assignment. The containment procedures of SCP were altered to indicate, "Cease has cracked the window open. I know you don't have the beacons in place to respond. They wouldn't even work there yet, but the signal carries. Maybe you're still tuned in enough to hear." Researchers have concluded that the 2/77 events were created by what is termed an autonomous conceptual entity. The entity is believed to be responsible for the developments which led to the reclassification of SCP to Euclid. Careful questioning of subjects close to Agent Weber has indicated that the Weber entity is exhibiting psychotic behavior and severe dissociation. The Weber entity has so far only contaminated living and sentient humans and animals by interacting with them, although it was believed that the entity broke this pattern by conceptually obtaining SCP, a safe level object housed in the nearby Armed Containment Area 23 to which Weber possessed object clearance. Further investigation has discovered that SCP possesses a level of intelligence similar to a dolphin. The containment procedures of SCP were altered to indicate this new information and to mitigate difficulties caused by SCP-1383 contamination. In an attempt to prevent further contamination of anomalous objects in containment, Agent Weber was subjected to Class C amnestic therapy and has been reassigned to janitorial duty at Research Facility 5, restricted to low clearance areas. Following Weber's acclimation to his new surroundings, this measure seems to have been effective. From the 3rd of April 1977 to the 15th of March 1977, the entity remained near Maintenance Assistant Weber's location at an approximate distance of 20 meters. Although this effectively completely alleviated the side effects of exposure to SCP-1383, Weber reported no decrease in feelings of alienation and anxiety related to contamination. On 3/15, at roughly 800 hours local time, the entity is believed to have approached the mimetic hazard which it had previously tampered with. Your distress call was received. Something is keeping us from getting warlocked on. But we think we've found the window you went through. But it's too real. And close to the nexus on 2 axes. We can't figure out which. And opening the window would let a catastrophe out of here. SCP's behavior as prompted by this incident has yet to be replicated. The whereabouts of the Weber autonomous conceptual entity and the SCP conceptual entity are unknown, and both are presumed to be neutralized. While Maintenance Assistant Weber can no longer be reliably tracked or supervised due to the unique nature of his contamination, his mental and physical state leads the facility director to consider him a low-priority threat. The facility director has issued an official statement requiring Research Facility 5 personnel to report any possible encounters with maintenance staff that they cannot remember. Addendum. Following resolution of Incident 2/77, Experiment 1383-9 was repeated with a new subject in order to update data on SCP-1383 conceptual entities. Termed Experiment 1383-1321, the initial phase was identical to previous attempts, but the list created by the subject is significantly different. See Experiment Log 1383-1321A. The spherical object described in earlier experiments was reported to be broken, although the rest of its physical description was unchanged, and descriptions of persons inside SCP-1383 were amended with ascribed behavior. Examples include beating against the walls or doors, scratching at the walls or doors, screaming, committing violent acts upon themselves and each other, lying dead or possibly unconscious, writing on the walls or furniture using, "We can't retrieve you." SCP-1383 contaminated Foundation personnel who have been matched to conceptual entities on this and similar registries are imagined by prompted staff as exhibiting the recorded behavior. These entities are believed to be conscious, but lacking a means of egress. Reported conceptual written content includes various expletives and indecipherable or obscene symbols, as well as a crudely drawn SCP Foundation logo and small notes in Spanish, English, and an unknown language, including "me salgo de este jugo 2 and call ceased designate but one of the axes may be linear time." Point 3. As of 11/81, 2 additional autonomous conceptual entities have been recorded within SCP-1383. One is identified by test subjects as the U.S. Labor Party, a political group which the public believes to have disbanded in October of 1979. The second is the only instance which has been described by test subjects as located outside of the room, an entity which research subject 1383 to 1333 described as an Ecruman watching from the window. No window is present in the layout of SCP-1383. Footnotes. 1. For example, one interviewed subject became tearful when questioned about her brother, who had been affected by a 2/77 extranormal event. She described calling her brother once or more per day, to make sure he's still alive, but was unable to explain the source of her anxiety. 2. How do I get out of this game? 3. Which would mean just having to wait for competition to begin. Patience. Dear Colliginator,